The Karate Kid has had multiple sequels and reboots, including most recently in 2010, a version starring Jaden Smith and Jackie Chan. It's an age-old tale of a wise man imparting wisdom into a teenager who then uses it to defeat his fears and, more importantly, his bullies. Cobra Kai continues this story by allowing the defeated bullies to not only tell their side, but to show how, given enough time, information, and patience, even the worst of our enemies can become a good guy. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm on the couch. All right, this is Ronald, and I am on the couch after watching the third season of Cobra Kai on Netflix. Cobra Kai, created by Josh Heald, John Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg, based on the Karate Kid, created by Robert Mark Kamen, starring William Zabka, Ralph Macchio, Courtney Henggler, Xolo Mariduena, Tanner Buchanan, Mary Mauser, Jacob Bertrand, Gianni Decenzo, and Martin Kove. Cobra Kai is a show that continues the legacy of the Karate Kid, which was movies that came out in the 80s starring Ralph Macchio and Pat Morita as the main character, Danny LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi, respectively. And it's a show about a kid who learns karate in order to combat the bullies in his life. It was a show that, many of us saw as young children. It came out in the 80s. I was probably maybe 7 or 8 years old the first time I saw it. It's something that kind of endured because there was parts 1, 2, and 3, as well as the next Karate Kid, as well as the remake starring Jaden Smith. So I've seen every single one of them. I am very much into the Karate Kid cinematic universe as it expands. And when I first heard about this, it was very interesting because the premise, this came out on YouTube Red. And I remember when I was told the premise, I was like, that's interesting. And the idea was that Gianni, who is the bad guy in the first Karate Kid, he's the guy that Danny LaRusso is getting bullied by. Again, Danny LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio. He's getting bullied by relentlessly the entire movie. And famously, at the end of the movie, Danny LaRusso, he kicks Johnny in the face, thus winning the tournament. He wins. We're all excited. The good guys win. Bad guys lose. Well, as the story continues, we see, we're reminded, I think it's in the second Karate Kid, we're reminded that Johnny is a teenager. They're all teenagers. These are all teenagers we're dealing with. And we see his dojo master, and we see his sensei beating him up in the parking lot for losing. So and just put a pin in that for later. For those of you who have never seen Cobra Kai, I don't know why you'd be listening to this episode if you've never seen the Karate Kid or Cobra Kai, but just laying some premise to what this show is about. So the premise of the show, Cobra Kai, picks up with Johnny, who is down on his luck. He's not really down on his luck. He's just living like a less than fulfilled life, kind of just existing, still stuck in the 80s, feeling like he got, that kick just kicked him out of his destiny, if you will. And it picks up with him kind of restarting Cobra Kai because he sees a kid named Miguel be getting bullied. So he beats up the bullies and decides, maybe I should restart this dojo. He restarts the dojo with Miguel. That is the premise for the first season. Now, when I heard this premise, it was on YouTube, and I'm like, well, I'm never going to pay for YouTube Red, so I'm never going to see this series. However, afterwards, Netflix came in after the second season was released and bought the series, and now it's on Netflix. So A couple months back, I binge watched the first season and was like, this is pretty good. I like the premise of this. I really enjoyed this. Now, it had some problems. Now, this is where let me just swing into the review part of this. So here's a show with, for me, what I would consider a 4-star premise. It is a 4-star premise because rarely do you ever get a show or a continuation or a reboot or any type of property that takes the original characters and the original actors from whatever the original series was and continue the story in a logical way, in a way that makes sense. And when I say that, I mean, Bad Boys for Life came out earlier this year, and the premise made no sense to me whatsoever, because I'm sitting here watching these two men who are well over the hill try to do the same things they did in the 90s, in the late 90s, early 2000s. This is 2020, so maybe there should be a different premise here. Maybe they should change it up a little bit. There has to be some sort of, if you're going to do a reboot, if you're going to continue to tell a story, there has to be a natural way to continue the story in a way that like logically makes sense. So with Cobra Kai, I liked it because here we've decided to switch the camera from the main character, the good guy who was Danny LaRusso in the original, and they've now switched it back to Gianni, who is really the underdog now because he's starting this upstart karate dojo, and Danny LaRusso is there. That's one part, because I remember I was like, okay, they're calling it Cobra Kai. It must be all about Gianni, but it's actually equally about Danny LaRusso because Danny LaRusso has, propelled to the success. He's the 2-time All Valley Karate champion, and now he's owning these car dealerships, and he's kicking the competition, and he's using all these karate analogies in order to sell these cars. So he's become a big success, has a lot of money, cute little family, everything that you could possibly want, success, all that stuff, influence, all that stuff. And so they're at odds with each other. And that's the premise for the first season, which is that Johnny's trying to start Cobra Kai back up again. And Danny LaRusso is like, no, because you guys are a bunch of bullies. Why would you guys ever want to start that here? And so there's all these other layers of conflicts that kind of come into this. And let me just say, I'm going to talk spoilery about this because it's really hard to delve into the good and the bad parts of this series without saying exactly why it's good and why it's bad. And some of that's going to lead into spoiler territory. So again, if you haven't watched the series yet, go back and watch it. If you're not interested in watching the series, just keep listening. You're fine. And I'll keep doing things like explaining what's going on in the series. So the entirety of the first season, and again, I think I said this is a 4-star premise. I believe I said it was a 4-star premise, but it's a 2-star execution. And the reason why I say that is because we're watching a show in which I get it. I feel like there's a lot of good things going on here. There's a lot of ideas of the anguish and the pain that we have from our childhood traumas, from our teenage traumas, the things that go unaddressed that carry with us into adulthood, the resentment that we have against wrongs that happened to us years ago, in some cases weeks ago, or whatever, the things that we carry with us that affect how we see the world and how we view the world. I think this show does a very good job of nailing that. Especially in the character of Gianni, who was supposed to be the ultimate bad guy in the first Karate Kid. And I mean, I hated that kid growing up. I was like, there's no way in the world there's any redemptive value in this man whatsoever. However, what they do a great job in building this character, Gianni, what they do with him is they allow him to grow in the series. They allow him to look back, reflect on his actions and say, maybe that wasn't the best thing. Maybe these policies that Cobra Kai aren't the best thing. Maybe I shouldn't be teaching these kids this type of thing, and there's a lot of problematic behavior that Gianni displays because he's stuck in the past. He's not very good with technology, which they use that as a kind of a recurring bit, which is very, very funny to watch. And he he doesn't address women very respectfully. He uses the P word to address people who are weak, considered weak to him. He uses that a lot. And he's not like the greatest guy. However, you can see him, kind of working it out in his brain and realizing and trying to push himself forward, trying to be more tolerant. He's representative of kind of like our uncles and our dads who are like out here and they're, seeing the world change and seeing all this progress and then wondering, why they're like looking and saying, I feel like I'm a step behind, but I'm not sure why, because I'm just trying to live my life. You know, we all have that friend that says that problematic thing, but they don't want to hurt anybody. They don't actually want to be hurtful to anyone else. That's just kind of who they are. And when you try to tell them to change, their initial thought is to resist. But upon reflection, they'll come back and be like, okay, maybe I can not say the F word. Maybe I can not do something that's disrespectful or problematic. And that's what we see Gianni doing. And I think that's why in this show, he is the most complex character written for this show. The problem is all of the other characters, including Danny LaRusso, are not written with the same complexity as Gianni. And because of that, I think one of the things I call this show is a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, because too often you'll see someone on the show trying to do the right thing and it's misinterpreted by someone else. And I think the writing style is meant for the misinterpretation to create conflict. Oh my God, I saw you with my girl, or you were in the store and I saw you, eyeballing me the wrong way. And it could just be explained by saying, oh no, we have the same homeroom class. That's why I was with your girl. Or, oh no, I had something stuck in my eye. And rather than just explaining that, they say, what? Don't yell at me. And then next thing you know, a fight breaks out, and it's all meant to do. It's a very cheap way of creating conflict when there really doesn't, in a lot of cases, that's not how the conflict needs to exist on this show. And this happens several times over the course of 3 seasons of this show. So by the time we get to the end of the first season, we have Gianni training. Training Miguel, who is his a neighbor who was getting beat up by some kids, who he trains to become really good at Cobra Kai. He gets all these kids who were bullied, all these kids who were, who felt like, underdogs. They're all coming to Cobra Kai. And first Johnny's like, why are you guys here? I don't train people like you. And then they all become very good at karate, fighting and finding their identities, all that. And when they get to the All Valley tournament, they're like, yeah, Cobra Kai. They're all jacked up on Cobra Kai. And Gianni is looking at them like, wait, I don't think I want this for these kids. I don't want them to fall into the same path that I did, drinking the Kool-Aid and being in Cobra Kai. Yeah, no mercy, strike first. So he sees all these kids, doing this, and that's when he's having a conflict. At the same time, Johnny's son, who we see is introduced earlier in this season, also enters the competition, unaffiliated, and he gets into it with one of the Cobra Kais, and stuff begins to ensue. But by a series of whatever, Danny LaRusso ends up training Johnny's son, which again, it is very much there to breed conflict in the series, which I don't think is, I think it's there for conflict, and I get the drama in it, but I feel like they could have done a better job or picked a better method to create this same type of drama, because there's this escalating battle between Danny LaRusso and Gianni. And it's kind of all predicated on a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. So that's the first season. By the time we get to the end of the first season, as Johnny's, they win the All Valley tournament. Miguel wins, even though he wins in a way that's kind of aggressive and ends up kind of being a bully. He wins in that way. And at the end, John Kreese, who is Johnny's old sensei, the one who was beating him up when he got second place in the All Valley tournament, he comes back and he's like, yeah, we're bringing Cobra Kai back to its former glory. So over the course of the next 2 seasons, because I finished the next 2 seasons, I think the biggest problem I've seen in this show is that it kind of leans into being over the top and a little more far-fetched than I think its initial premise suggests that it should be. Because by the time we get to the second and third season, we have roving gangs of karate teenagers who are beating each other up in the streets. They're breaking into each other's houses to beat each other up. They're fighting each other at school. One kid is almost paralyzed. I mean, they are over the top. And now don't get it twisted. As someone who watched Karate Kid, I'm going to watch every episode of this because I want to see how this story ends. I want to see where they continue the story to. But I think the writers could learn in this show is some restraint. I mean, they're just like, yeah. And then the kid kicks him and he goes off a balcony and then he breaks his back and then he's in a coma I'm like, wait, you guys need to exercise some restraint. Like he could severely break his leg and still have the same issues that they've created with this guy falling over a balcony onto his back, onto the ground and going into a coma. I'm like, and then he's unable to walk for a while. And like, you guys could have created that same type of tension with like more restraint, but it's like whoever's in the writing room's like, nah, how far can we go with this? We got to go all the way. I mean, and there's a scene in the third season in which some people are meeting in a house and another karate dojo. These are teenagers. And I mean, they look like teenagers. These aren't like teenagers that look like they're 30. These are teenagers that look like teenagers. They're in the house. And all of a sudden this guy hears a cat sound. He goes, oh, there's a cat outside. And he goes outside. And the next scene is him being thrown through the kitchen window, breaks the glass, comes through the kitchen window. And all of these kids storm into this house and they're like ready to fight. And then they start tearing up this house. It's Danny LaRusso's house. They start tearing up this house, all fighting each other. And it's like, it's not that it's unrealistic that teenagers would be in a fight, but the idea that you would break and enter and then get into a fight with somebody. I was like, this again, and there's several scenes like this in which they meet up to fight, to have these epic fights in different places, at school, in an arcade, at somebody's house. It's never like in the streets or at the mall. Well, yeah. And actually, ironically, one of them is at the mall. So there's all these instances in which these kids are fighting in the streets. And there's only really one instance of other adults being like, yo, these kids fighting in the street is a problem. Like we should, and that's only one episode and it kind of just goes away. They're just like, yo, y'all can't just be fighting in the streets. And they're like, we want to fight in the streets. They're like, okay. And the adults like kind of just leave. And the only adults in the room are the two with the rivalry that's creating all this conflict between Gianni and Danny LaRusso. So that being said, this show is not bad. Again, it's a 4-star premise with a 2-star execution, I would say. It's fun. It's a lot of fun if you watch it and just you want to have a show where you can just watch it and just roll your eyes a little bit, but enjoy it. It's fun to watch in that regard. In some ways, it's very frustrating because it asks you to suspend disbelief for some portions while not asking you to do it for other portions, which I think can tend to be a little bit problematic. There's a lot of John Kreese, the evil people in this are like a little too evil. They're like mustache twirling evil. Like they get to a place where they're just unbelievably evil in a place where I'm just like, I don't see how you guys could. It just seems like evil to a point of like not existing in the same universe that the show actually exists in. That being said, it's a fun show. If you've never had any interest in watching The Karate Kid, not any interest in that, you probably won't like this show. If you watched it in the 80s and enjoyed it, or in the 80s, 90s and enjoyed it as a kid, this is definitely a show that is written well for you. I mean, that is kind of written for us. Now, writing's not so great. Acting's a little bit over dramatic. And sometimes the set just kind of looks cheap. And I think that's because this originally was a YouTube show. So they're operating with not the biggest budget. That all being said, solid 3-star show. This is a 3 of 5-star show. I would recommend it to most people if you just want to have a good time. I don't know if it's winning any Emmys or breaking any new ground, and it's extremely predictable. I mean, like by the time you watch one scene in this show, you're like, okay, good guy's going to win. This guy's going to win. This guy's going to lose. I do what this show does well is rotate who the good guy is and where the gray area is of this show, until about midway through the second season when we're like, okay, clearly John Kreese is the bad guy. He is the bad guy. Everyone else around him is just kind of anti-heroes or a good guy, but this guy is absolutely the bad guy. So yeah, Cobra Kai, I think on Netflix, you guys, if you want something fun to watch, go ahead. You can even watch it with your kids. It's nothing crazy that they can't see. Lots of, kids fighting each other, but nothing devastating, anything like that. Even the paralyzing scene isn't devastating or anything like that. Nothing gory. So yeah. And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of ohitsBigRon Studios. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. To find out more about this show and other ohitsBigRon Studio shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ohitsBigRon. That's at ohitsBigRon. If you like this show, check out our sister show, Time Well Spent. Leaving the Theater will be back soon, but until then, I'll be here on the couch.